Hi, my name is Beth Manuel. I'm with the Ann Arbor District Library. Today we're going to have a panel discussion about anxiety, what it looks like in different age groups, and how we can cope with it. We were originally going to be stressing what anxiety is like for folks in this COVID pandemic, but we have added to the discussion to focus somewhat on racialized violence and that kind of trauma and stress that people of color might be experiencing. Okay, so let's start by introducing our panelists, and we'll start with Marna.
Good morning. My name is Marta Connie Robinson. I am a clinical social worker in private practice with Amplify Collectivo, as well as with Catholic Social Services. And I am also a associate librarian at the University of Michigan.
Lisa?
My name is Lisa Anderson. I'm a clinical social worker with Michigan Medicine. I work at the Regional Alliance for Healthy Schools, which is school-based healthcare in Washtenaw County and Genesee County. I'm also a therapist at Room to Talk.
And Christine? Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Christine Snyder. I'm the director at the University of Michigan Health System Children's Center and adjunct faculty at Madonna University.
Very nice. And Reina?
Good morning. I think actually by the time everybody watches this, it will be evening, right?
Yeah.
My name's Reina Legrand. I'm a clinical social worker at Amplify Collectivo. And I'm also a yoga and mindfulness teacher. I own my own business called Rise Education and Consulting. And so we wanted to actually take a moment before we dive into the conversation to really acknowledge that we're talking about stress and anxiety and trauma and grief. And as you're watching this, you might be coming with feelings, right, related to all of that. And so we wanted to just kind of ground ourselves to get started and sort of serve as an anchor so that as we're talking, if you start to feel kind of activated or overwhelmed, maybe you can kind of come back to that like home base. So I'm going to invite you to be in a comfortable seat. If you're lying down at home, or standing up, that's okay too. Just be comfortable. And you can keep your eyes open or you can close your eyes. I'm going to close my eyes because it's a little easier for me to get in the zone that way. And we'll just be here for a moment. And I want you to just contact whatever it is that is touching the ground or your chair or your bed or your couch. Just sense into, if you're seated, right, maybe your feet on the ground. Or maybe feel your back against the chair. If you're lying down, there's probably a little bit more of your body touching. So just notice that. And just see if you can sense into that as a source of support. Right, just sense into that as kind of like external feedback to show you how held you are right now. When everything else in the world is kind of chaotic, right? It can feel difficult to find our footing, find our ground, feel held, feel contained. So let's just use this feedback we feel to help us tap into that, even if just like a teeny tiny bit. Just feeling into that. And, you know, my advice, if this isn't soothing at all, if this doesn't help you feel centered, is to maybe even just open your eyes and kind of orient yourself to the space. Just be mindful of where you literally are right now. And then when you're ready, just invite like teeny tiny movements in. Maybe wiggle your toes or your fingers or move your head side to side. Yeah. And if your eyes are closed, when you're ready, you can open them up. You can remember, right? You've got this anchor here, and you're here in this physical space around you.
It's really
Thank
helpful.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Reina.
Okay. Well, we were going to start by talking about how our youngest folks might evidence anxiety and stress, and what we might see in small children.
Sure. So when we think about our youngest members of our community, we're thinking about children that are birthed really up into the early years of elementary school, so say second or third grade. And a couple of key things to remember in this age is that they very much co-regulate their emotions. So they read a lot from adults. They're very perceptive. They don't yet have the ability to manage big waves of emotions and process it in the way that adults do. They can often sense uncertainty, but don't always understand the source of it. And they also have very limited communication skills. Definitely for our little babies, they're nonverbal or pre-verbal, so they're going to communicate more through crying. But even as we see children a little older in the early childhood years, preschool, kindergarten, first and second grade, we're still going to get a lot more communication through behavior because of their lack of understanding about the stress and tension that they can perceive, but maybe not fully understand. And so a lot of times that can look like crying or tantrums, but even children working very hard to please the adults in their life, they're trying to restore balance where they sense tension and trying to get things back to that kind of comfortable place of things are okay. And so we might see behavior changes in very young children. Two other things to maybe take note of is the eating and sleeping habits of young children. And that could mean they sleep more, sleep less, eat more, eat less. Really, any change in behavior in the early childhood years is going to indicate some processing of increased stress or anxiety.
And I'm going to add here, Christine, good points that particularly now with COVID-19, as well as all of the issues dealing with the protests and racialized trauma right now, there are a lot of children and young adults that I am seeing that in addition to just the behavior change, they're feeling a lot of hopelessness, as far particularly Black children, African American children, and young adults, because though the conversations have been going on since probably they were young, they're still seeing friends, families out in the news, and they're watching this, and those fears of, is mom going to come home? Is dad going to come home? Is brother going to come home? I'm seeing a lot more hopelessness and increased panic, particularly with getting in the car and just going to the store, because they may see a police car and it sets in panic and anxiety for them and increased stress levels.
Marna, those are really good points, and I think later in the conversation we're going to get to thinking about protective and restorative strategies. But I think what you said is crucial, because first we have to identify things that might be a little more alarming to a very young child that adults might kind of overlook. Like you said, a police car driving by, or simply wondering, is my mom or dad going to come home today, is a very realistic fear or insecurity for young children, especially young Black children, that adults might not always recognize. We have a little more sense of certainty, but even, for Black adults, that is an increased realistic fear right now. And the media is giving us tons of daily, realistic, scary reminders. So being able to identify and recognize those real fears for children is huge.
Absolutely. So considering what kinds of things we might see in younger older kids or young adults. Lisa, do you want to speak to that?
So in middle school and high school, it can continue on with the symptoms that we saw in the younger kids, the worrying, the restlessness, the anxiety, but we can also see a lot of irritability as connections are lost, social connections are lost, and also routines are lost. Students in this age range may say that they are really happy not to be in school because of the academics, but can also be grieving the loss of the social connections that they had. So we do see, excessive worry, repeated questions about what's going to happen next. Concentration is a big thing. Poor concentration during crises is very common. So working from home and doing work for school has been really, really challenging for the students that I have been working with. They, as I said, they could be very irritable. They could demonstrate some of this in anger. They are going to probably have a shift in their sleeping patterns and could possibly be having difficulty sleeping, leading to fatigue and feeling very bored and feeling very negative throughout the day. It's hard for them to see a future at this time because there's nobody that can answer that question. When am I going back to school? When are things going to get back to normal? And in combination with parents' stress, sometimes it's very hard to have the patience to be able to manage your middle school or teenagers' anger and frustration, and in addition to what you're feeling yourself.
Yeah, sure, it's really challenging. Marna, do you have anything to add about in that particular age range that?
I think that Lisa, really shared some very pertinent information because in addition to what she has said, I think you will see a lot of this particular population taking on the anxiety levels of their caregivers. And what I have seen, what I have, worked with in the past is increase in nightmares with these kids. And I think it's important that, the anxiety, even though it is affecting that particular age group, it affects the whole family. So, but yeah, I think I would add that increase more levels of sleep disturbance, as well as I've seen an increase in, underlying issues of eating issues in that particular population. And some have resorted to some other methods of self-harm to deal with, trying to navigate and deal with the uncomfortableness of everything they're dealing with.
Yeah. What about self-medicating at that age? Is that something that you're recognizing? Or?
Yes, definitely there is always the risk of students in this age range finding alternate ways of managing their stress and anxiety through self-medicating and through self-harm. And those things are critical for parents to kind of be on the alert about and make sure that they have a good handle on what's available in their home and keep things that are could possibly be dangerous away. So locking up medications, locking up alcohol or other drugs is very is important during this time. Students in this age range are known to be impulsive, and if they think it, they do it. And so I'm not saying everybody, but it's more likely in this age range as they're developing their ability to handle more complicated tasks and more complicated emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Right. Reina, do you want to speak to what young or adults and older adults might be feeling? And
Sure. Yeah, so I think there's really such a range of reactions. You know, of course, I think there's some overlap, but I think, I mean, if we just start sort of with the COVID issue, right? I think that the presence of this virus triggers all sorts of stuff for folks, right? It triggers grief, it triggers fear, shame, anger. And that manifests a little differently in all of us. For some adults, it could be feeling more activated, right? Kind of in like that fight or flight mode. So feeling a lot of anxiety, you know, really physical sensations of anxiety and hyperarousal, anger, hypervigilance, lashing out at others, right? It seems so long ago, but I remember sort of at the beginning of everything, so much judgment about how this person or that person was coping and what they were doing, right? And that judgment comes from a place of protection, right? It is part of the response. I'm also seeing an increase in sort of like obsessive thoughts, and like compulsions, which I think totally makes sense, right? When we don't have much control over our situations, we seek ways to control. Hoarding could become an issue, right? Other people are going to feel maybe more sort of in shutdown mode. And it's possible that people feel themselves sort of jumping back and forth between like high levels of stress and low levels of like, I just can't do anything today, right? I mean, I know probably, you know, many of us on this call and so many people who are listening are familiar with now the experience of just like feeling tired, feeling like you're sort of sludging along every day. And of course, you know, like many of the other things the panelists have shared, changes in mood, changes in energy, changes in appetite, sleep, a lot of substance use, I think is happening right now as a way to regulate. And I think, you know, these feelings, like Marna said, are even deeper for Black people and Indigenous people and people of color as well, because we're all grieving things right now, right? We're grieving the plans that we had this summer, the weddings we were going to go to, the things that we did on a weekly basis, the people that we saw. But I think for Black folks, I mean, we're grieving the death of George Floyd and Tony McDade and others. We're grieving the people that we know personally who have been harmed by the police or racism, but we're also grieving generations, right? For me, like I feel this deep connection to generations of pain and trauma right now. And so for me, what's important when I'm working with clients is to normalize to an extent like the range of emotions, even though some of them might seem or feel like unproductive or useless. It's our body's way of trying to protect and regulate us, like Lisa said earlier too, or excuse me, Christine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just to interject with what Reina said, she brings us some really good points. And I think if we look at when the pandemic hit, I think grief and loss are things that people don't realize that a lot of people are struggling with, because having to work remotely and not see the people that you see every day, 5 days a week, is a big loss to people. And I'm finding that people are not having a good gauge on when to unplug, because everybody's doing remote work, they're doing meetings and whatnot. They're not taking good self-care because there's no distinction between home and work right now. It just kind of crosses over. And that is a big issue because it's creating more stress. Should I cook dinner? Oh, wait, I have this one last report I need to finish. And so it's kind of crossing over. So there's no boundary between home life and work life right now. So there's a lot of stress in that. But I think loss is a big one, because they're not seeing the people that they see every day. And in some cases, not communicating with, let's say, I used to pass such and such down the hall. I'm not seeing them every day. I'm wondering if they're okay. And so those are some of the issues that I've been seeing in a lot of the populations that I work with, particularly in adults.
Yeah.
Can I just interject there? I think the concept of grief and loss is really important. I think first for adults to consider what they're grieving right now and what they've lost, but also to consider how that perspective might be the same or different for children. So thinking about my age range here, the younger children don't have that perception of loss. So for example, my son experienced his first birthday during this pandemic, and he doesn't know any different. So our tiny little celebration at home feels the same for him. But for people in our family, that was a big loss. For my in-laws to miss out on their grandson's first birthday is a big deal. At the same time, adults might experience that kind of disconnect or loss from being with their colleagues from day to day, but not realize that that feels the same for children that are in like first grade, second grade, third grade. Mm-hmm. And children may or may not have that perception. Some children might just be experiencing this as a long summer. And so I think just merely pausing to consider what might feel like a loss here, what might children be grieving, what might we be reacting to in a really big way that children aren't processing in the same way. So just pausing there and figuring out, what are we grieving? What is the loss? And what does that look like for children, whatever their age or their experiences? What's their loss or their grief, or what are they oblivious to that might not be impacting them? Just that pause there might be useful.
And I think that's what we all know, that how much we can, how perceptive children are. So when we're stressing, or our young children can feel that too. So it's really important that we take care of ourselves the best we can, but it's just, there's so much unknown.
Well, I actually just wanted to add one more thing about the grief and loss piece, just to acknowledge that, I mean, we're all talking about people who are living right now, right, and struggling with anxiety. And I just want to acknowledge too, like, that there have been so many funerals that haven't been able to happen, or haven't been able to happen in the right way, both related to COVID-19, police brutality, and whatever else, right? Life goes on. People have cancer and other health issues. And so I just felt like we should acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. Thank you, Reina.
We have another population to consider, which are folks that are either pregnant or postpartum. So Lisa, you were going to talk about that, what kinds of...
So the perinatal period, pregnancy, and then following first year of a baby's life are particularly vulnerable times for new families. Mothers are experiencing significant hormonal shifts that are creating more vulnerability in their emotions, and also their anxiety is higher because of this new little person that's the most important thing in their life, and a new important thing in their life that they need to protect. So this environment feels particularly toxic to someone in the perinatal period and can lead to increased mental health concerns, regardless of this situation. But with this additional stress with COVID, it is leading to more issues with mental health, and a lack of ability to address those concerns. So women can be feeling, this happens, I think a lot of people think it's only postpartum depression, but honestly, in my experience, women begin experiencing depression and anxiety symptoms or other mood concerns in the third trimester. They're just masked by the physical discomforts of pregnancy in a lot of cases, and women don't seek out help, so that when they hit the postpartum period, they're already coming into it sort of in a weakened emotional state, because they didn't address it in the third trimester. So they could feel sadness, tearfulness, anxiety, OCD, so obsessive compulsive kind of feelings, especially with worries about germs and contaminants and bringing anything home to a new baby. They can feel, they of course they're going to have difficulty sleeping third trimester and postpartum because of the discomforts of pregnancy and then the needs of the newborn. And any lack of sleep can cause emotional dysregulation significantly. The fears of the future of their kids. They became pregnant before all of this happened, and they had joys and expectations that have now been completely decimated in some ways, and their fear for their children and what their children will be experiencing can really play a role in their emotional makeup. And then they can really experience the lack of connection. They can't have the support that they normally would have. I've seen a lot of women that are really struggling with, so does my partner stay home with my 2-year-old while I deliver, or do I risk having someone come in to watch my 2-year-old so that my husband can be with me while I deliver my second child? And that's a real issue that was not an experience previous to the COVID. So everything is amplified during a particularly vulnerable period, and we need to be watching and asking and connecting with women in this period and families in this period to make sure that they are doing okay. Because one of those nasty parts about anxiety is anxiety makes you feel crazy, and sometimes it's very scary to admit how bad you feel for fear of someone thinking you're not going to be a good enough mom, or you're not going to be able to do this parenting, because that's what anxiety tries to convince you is the truth. So reaching out, talking, connecting as best as we can are really critical during this time. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Lisa, if I can just add, as a mother of a child that just turned 1 and not sleeping through the night and trying to work from home with 2 young children, and through the pandemic and the racial tension nationally and locally. And you're right, it absolutely becomes something that we feel like we should be able to handle, but we are all approaching a combination of stress that we've never had to process or understand before. So, recognizing when we need to ask for help and that it's okay to ask for help is really hard. And you're right, the fluctuating hormones and the perception that I should be able to handle this is real, or to continue to tell myself that I don't have it as hard as other people do for whatever reason. That can kind of take over the rational process of, I need to get some help. I haven't slept. I'm having nightmares. I'm trying to balance, all of these things. And so it's very real. And we weren't prepared to have the kind of support systems in place for pregnant women and mothers of parents of newborns in a pandemic. We weren't ready. So I think your acknowledgement of that is huge.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I see it quite a bit. I'm seeing it quite a bit in the women. And if you think about this period, there is a new experience every single day as a third trimester and then a postpartum mom. And you've got to learn how to feed a baby. You've got to learn how to soothe a baby. You need to learn how to, just become attached to this baby. There's so many learning pieces. And then if the news, the information out in the world is coming in, it's very hard to balance all of that, and it feels very overwhelming.
And, we're calculating risk we don't understand. So
Mhm.
trying to make a decision to bring my baby in for vaccines or keep my baby home to risk exposure. I'm calculating risk I don't have a medical background to process. And that's a lot of stress on a parent. I've definitely lost sleep over what's the right thing for my baby. That I don't really, I don't know the answer to that.
Right. And I think it's even gotten worse with I think it was easier with the stay-at-home order almost, because you could just say, oh, it's a law, we can't go out, it is. But now families have to decide how much risk to assume and whether or not when they go out, will other people be following, the safety recommendations and the distancing recommendations that would put them at less risk. And it's very overwhelming. You just don't know. The other thing is that for the OB appointments are being done virtually, so you don't have that reassurance. And the pediatric visits, the well visits, if they don't need anything specific like an immunization, are being done virtually. So you don't get that validation. Yes, my baby is growing appropriately. Yes, my pregnancy, I can hear my baby on the Doppler. And that reassurance that comes with those progressive visits can really make a difference in kind of quieting down that anxiety. That's also been lost in this pandemic, which I think is a really increases the anxiety of perinatal women.
Yeah, good point. What about older adults? We were going to discuss what kinds of things impact older adults. Or we know that they're really very I can't even think of the word. Sorry.
Vulnerable, maybe.
Vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yes, they are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And may have become more isolated. Did you want to speak to that, Reina? Or
yeah, sure. I can speak to that a little bit. Definitely isolation. Might even be feeling kind of ostracized if your family is staying away from you in order to protect you, right? Or, if you live in a nursing facility or some sort of home facility, you might not be able to see your friends. There might be thoughts of regret, right? Fear, denial. You might know more people who are struggling with COVID-19 or other, health conditions. And so I think it's like kind of even maybe similar to the adult experience with that additional layer of being older and being closer to your mortality.
Yeah, I think if just to piggyback on what you said, Reina, it is a lot of fears, a lot of denials, a lot of grief and loss because they may have lost family members, friends. I think the biggest that I've seen is just the isolation that leads to boredom. And there are some populations within the older group that are at risk for developing hopelessness, suicidal ideation that kicks in. And I think the biggest thing that in this population that I have seen is I'm the elder of this family. I'm supposed to take care of all of my kids and I'm supposed to do that, but nobody's coming by because I have to stay home, and they've lost community too. Older populations usually go to community centers, church, they go out and get coffee. They couldn't do that. So there's a huge loss there. I know as and I'm going to put my other hat on as a librarian, community is a big thing within our libraries, are big within our communities for people to come and gather. A lot of older populations went to the libraries. They can't do that. So it's, I think the biggest is isolation that I've been seeing, and that loneliness that comes with it. So
it's a lot to deal with. So why don't we start considering ways that we can help each other cope and our children cope? Christine, do you have any strategies that you use in your family or in the center?
Sure. So there are dozens of ways to think about how to support children that are exhibiting either their own personal reaction to stressful situations or what they kind of perceive from the adults around them. And I put them into three kind of basic buckets. And the first would be relationships. The second is consistency, and the third is play. And so within relationships, it's really important that they have someone they're connected to, and ideally that would be their primary caregiver, often a parent, sometimes a grandparent. People may have nannies or neighbors or another family member that cares for the child, but that consistent person or people in their life is going to maintain the relationships that are very proactive, but also restorative when facing trauma, both from what's happening with the pandemic or lack of access to resources because of the pandemic. So whether people are facing food insecurity or housing insecurity or not having medical resources, but also for the racial trauma, those relationships are going to be really essential to support children's social emotional well-being and sense of self. So while people may be facing childcare challenges as childcare centers have been shut down, their work hours may have increased or decreased or shifted, finding those consistent familiar people for children to spend time with, those relationships are going to be really helpful for children. Children co-regulate best with a familiar person. So having someone that they can connect with often and regularly is going to be really powerful. The second bucket, thinking about consistency for children, regardless of the situation you're in, most children's lives have changed. Something is different, whether it's their school or childcare situation, whether it's their parent working from in-home or out of home, working less, working more. Something has changed for children. So thinking about how we can build back in some consistency in routine or the environment. And it doesn't mean following a school schedule all day, every day, but it might be just building in some predictability. For children that are preschool through school age, you can build in a predictable schedule and talk about a weekday versus a weekend, or this is what we do for mornings, this is what we do for afternoons. But even consistent routines within a routine can be helpful. So having a wake-up routine or a good night routine that includes brushing your teeth, washing your face, reading a book, whatever that might be, can help them just have something they can count on every day that stays pretty much the same. That consistency is reassuring to children. It builds in predictability for them when there is a lot that is uncertain. And within that, recognizing what you can reassure your children that is certain. And that's going to be different for every family. So I have a pretty consistent schedule for our children. We can guarantee some specific family time. That's not going to be true for everyone, and that's okay. But they might have something that is consistent. You know, we always have a book before bed, or we always have breakfast together, or we always have a walk. It might be a different time every day, but something that children can count on that anchors them in that relationship and in that family, and is something that that they can kind of lean on. And then the third piece, thinking about play, has two components. And one is really resisting the urge to lean too hard on media for a couple of reasons. Developmentally, where children are in their brain growth, a lot of screen time is not beneficial for their little neurons to connect and develop. It is a lack of relationship often. So just being conscious to not lean too hard on the use of media, though as parents are trying to figure out how to work from home, it's really hard to not use those tools to get a break and some focused time on the work. So certainly it's going to happen. The other part of play is creating open-ended opportunities and space for children. So spending time outside, having time that's unstructured play is really essential because it gives children the power and control that they're lacking in the midst of both the COVID situation, but also in the midst of the racial violence and tension. Children need to have some feeling of power and control, and they can get that really easily in play. And we can give children what they need through fantasy. So when children are struggling and they're missing their friends, they're missing outings, they're missing things like that, we can give them a piece of that through play. So, camping in a tent in your backyard, throwing a birthday party for stuffed animals, having a picnic lunch in a different room of your house, can give children that sense of an adventure or something that feels connected to things that they're missing. So finding ways to use play to build back in some of those power and control elements for children can be really supportive too. I think the other piece that doesn't really cleanly fit into those buckets necessarily is thinking about are the language that we use with children, both in naming emotions but simplifying language that might be difficult for children to understand. So we can certainly say things like, COVID-19 and coronavirus. We don't have to shield children from the actual names of things, but we do want to think about how can we explain this, something really big that might be really confusing for young children. And so talking about, people getting sick and this being a way that we protect each other. Children can be both flexible and sometimes a little rigid. So changing our behaviors sometimes comes easier for children. If you're asking your first through third grader to wear a mask, that can feel really scary for adults. I know the first time I walked into a store and saw everyone masked, it kind of hit me that it might be a while before I see another human smile at me. That was kind of emotional. But for my son, we can talk about it more as like, dress up. It's protective, it's purposeful, but it's like wearing a mask on Halloween for him. Doesn't have the same kind of big social, emotional impact that maybe it did on me. So just thinking about, the ways that we talk about things for children, we can simplify it a little bit. It doesn't always have to be something really big and complex and overwhelming. But certainly with our children that are preschool and elementary school, we can talk to them about it. We can describe what's happening. We can simplify it to make it a little easier to process.
What about, I'm thinking of Black children and Indigenous people of color, if there's any other kinds of advice you might portend to us, Marna, with that age group.
I think Christine pointed out a lot of really good strategies. Communication is key, and I think like I said earlier, that communication has always started particularly with the racialized violence that we're experiencing right now in this country, within moms talking to their children, dads talking to their children. I think play is essential because it is allowing kids to be kids, allowing kids to explore, allowing kids to dream. And I think the issues that we are seeing right now in this country with the pandemic, with the violence, everything, kids are becoming adults way too soon with learning these, because the parents are watching the news. And kids are very, I always say they are the most interesting people I can ever come across, because they are very intuitive and they understand a lot than we give them credit for. And I think it's compounded within people of color within Black communities, Indigenous communities, and so forth, because they are learning so much more at a deeper level because of history that comes with it. But I think within populations of color, play is just the best thing. Talking is the best thing. Assuring children that they are safe is the best thing.
Very helpful. And for our a little bit older young people, Lisa, any advice for dealing with coping with anxiety?
So Christine, some of the things that Christine said really resonated with me for the middle and high school students. I think that, you know, they present and they look as if they're grown and that they have bigger ideas and they do have, you know, more expansive thoughts. And so we think that they are advanced and can handle these concepts. But checking in with them is really, really important, and asking them, you know, what their understanding is of things. Now, you might get a frustrated answer, or you may get shut down, but it's those dinner time conversations, those car rides that, you know, are great opportunities to connect with the kids and to ask them what's going on. What we see a lot in the middle and the high school is exactly, I think what Christine was saying, is that this lack of routine is destabilizing for them, even though they push against the request of the parents to have an organization, excuse me, stabilized schedule. They still need it. People do better if they maintain a consistent sleep-wake schedule. They do better if they maintain, I mean, this is anybody, little kids all the way through, you know, older age. We do better when we maintain some sort of schedule. Now, that's not to say to be rigid. One of the things that this age group is trying to do is to become independent and to individuate, become an individual. So we have to include them in the conversation, you know, expressing that we think it's important for them to have a sleep-wake schedule. We know that you don't have to get up to go anywhere. So does it make sense for you to go to bed at 11 or 12 and then get up at 9 or 10? Because that's a normal teenage rhythm, honestly. That's where, you know, teenagers actually go to if you let them do their own sleep schedule. But requiring that. The other things that are really important is to include them in activities around the house. So asking them participate in the cooking, ask them participate in the cleaning up of maintaining the house, and let them know how important it is that we work together. Kids this stage really thrive on being valued and doing things that are of value to the family. A hard part for parents is that we don't necessarily get that feedback, but it is very true that it's important to do that. I always encourage families to think about maintaining a good foundation for their kids, you know, making sure that they are getting hydration, that they aren't just getting sugar sweet beverages to drink all the time, that they need to stay hydrated, they need to stay have good nutrition in order to stay mentally healthy and well. So encouraging that through possibly like preparing meals together or shopping, making shopping lists together. Those are some of the things that you can do. Activity and play in this age range is critical. These students are striving for connection. They're striving for movement. I mean, this is their most physically prime part of their life. They need to move. So we need to encourage things. Either it's family walks or bike rides, or it's doing, if they're, you know, into it, maybe doing some of the video games such as the Xbox, bowling and tennis, and those sort of things that you can do as a family that are more active, things. Encouraging them to create dances and recording those dances and making a big deal about it, letting them perform. Those are things especially middle schoolers like. High schoolers are going to feel very, very lost without some of their sports. The kids that are very athletic are really going to need to maintain some sort of athletic activity in order to feel balanced, because that's what they're used to. So encouraging them to get out and to if they have friends, if they can do social distant walking, or even running. Maybe there's a group of cross-country kids that are out running, and encouraging them to do that. It's a challenge because there's a lot of pushback in this age range, but keeping up the dialogue and not pushing them, but encouraging them and talking about it from a sense of health and well-being is really important. There are some amazing resources online as well that can help with those activities. There's online yoga, there's online exercise, stretching, different sorts of things, maybe challenging your young person to learn a new skill. If you have a keyboard, maybe like, hey, maybe this is the time for you to learn how to play piano, or maybe this is the time to learn how to play a ukulele if you have something like that in your house. Encouraging new skill development can also bring some balance to a student who is struggling with a lack of structure and a lack of challenge. This is developmentally the time when students are to be learning, to be challenging, to be putting this information, developing different connections in their brain and pairing off connections that they don't need. So they continue to need challenges, and that will keep them moving forward. There are opportunities in the community to participate in online virtual protests and ways to learn about what is going on in your community and try to be involved. I would encourage them to do that so that they feel a sense of power in this very powerless environment for a lot of kids. And then the other thing is to limit the news and the social media. It's overwhelming for us as adults to keep on top of all of the events as they transpire, and it's very triggering. If we have the news on 24/7, then our kids are picking up on that as well, our middle school and our high school kids, and it can also be destabilizing and overwhelming to their system and create a brain patterns that are much more in the anxiety and everything is awful, nothing is good, by reinforcing those messages by always having media available and on all the time. Watching out for online struggles too is a huge challenge for parents. I know I have my youngest is 17, and just trying to keep up with all of the different opportunities that they have online has been really, really hard. But trying to have conversations with them about online safety, connecting with people who are safe, what's not safe, taking time away from social media, not allowing them to spend hours after hours just scrolling on social media, because that's very triggering and destabilizing for a kid of this age. They do a lot of comparisons to other kids' perfect personas online. They can find disturbing images, and they can find disturbing thoughts and things that can really trigger their basic survival and emotional center of their brain. So monitoring that as best as you can is really important, and having conversations about what they're seeing on social media, what they're seeing on the information that they're getting on their technology is really important. So yeah, those are some of the things that are really important as far as helping to support your middle school and high school student. If you're noticing significant dysregulation, not able to sleep, kids are not sleeping, they're not maybe not interested in eating, or they're eating too much, they're having a lot of tearfulness and a lot of emotionality, it would be important to get a hold of a professional to discuss that. Contact your pediatrician to discuss what you're seeing and see what the resources are and next steps to help your student, because it is it's a vulnerable time, and kids are very susceptible to those sort of stressors. So watching out for that.
Yeah.
I want to reiterate two things that Lisa said that are true for early childhood too, and that's the importance of remaining active, and even when your children push back. So I also have a 7-year-old, and we notice significant behavior changes if we're not encouraging activity, on days when he wouldn't naturally seek it out. And so, but once we get him out into the woods, he'll play for 2 hours and find bugs and rocks and collect things. But sometimes the negotiation to get him out the door feels kind of exhausting as an adult, but it's proactive. It's better if we do it before his behavior unravels. And so that was a key strategy for us from the beginning, especially when the weather was colder or rainier, finding times to get out. And so we'd have to negotiate with him a little bit. We'd let him choose where or what kind of activity, or we would play a game like an I Spy ABC game. We'd look for things with every letter of the alphabet, or we'd collect things or anything to kind of get him to hook him into it. And then once we were out, he was into it, but that was a significant behavior difference. But also your point about limiting the exposure to news and the media, recognizing that even very young children are perceptive to the themes and messages and language that's used in the news and media. So even for children under the age of 3 or 2, we sometimes think that they're not paying attention, but they are. And so it's important that we limit that as background. And then, like you said, for your own self-care, being conscious of how much and when you consume that. We absolutely should talk to children from a very young age about race and privilege and prejudice and bias and all of those things. But it's a service to them and ourselves to take time to educate ourselves as adults and get some kind of practice and looking at resources about how to talk about it with children. We're not always going to have all the answers, but it can help to give yourself time to teach yourself before you try and teach your children. So choosing the right times to expose children to some of that complex content is important too.
Marna, did you have anything to add about, just from your perspective?
I think this particular population they're trying to figure out who they are, their own identities, and they get a lot of that from their peers within schools, and they're at home around parents all day, and so they're gonna, especially high school, they're gonna gravitate to online and try and figure out who they are. And they're developing their own opinions about things. And I think that from my perspective is communication is the biggest, and encouraging this population to express who they are and then talk with them about it. I think with the pandemic and being stay at home, now that those are being lifted and the restrictions are a lot looser, we're still seeing a lot of, within my practice, I'm still seeing a lot of kids, this age group, that are afraid to go outside. And some of those fears are coming from the parents. They're afraid to go to the store. They're afraid to go to the park, and communicating. And I think Christine made a great point about encouraging and negotiating, get outside, go out and explore, go out and do a meetup with friends. And if you're not going to sit on top of each other, you have social distancing built in. A scavenger hunt where you're at one tree and they're 20 feet away at another tree. Because I think that this is a critical age for kids to develop their own ideas about things. And if we're not communicating with them, they're going to go online and find those things. And I think with a lot of the issues that we're seeing with racialized violence right now, this is a critical time to be talking with our kids and our young adults. because the worst thing that can happen is to go online and find ideas that may not be their own. And I think Lisa made a great point that if you're seeing issues within your child or young adult, is to consult with your healthcare professional for resources. Talk with a professional about what you can do for your child. There's a lot of good things. I mean, once a week, I make a commitment with my niece who lives in California, who's struggling with some of the same issues, where we get online and we play video games. Okay. I am not the biggest gamer in the world, but what I do is I get online and I mean, there's a 3-hour difference between it. And sometimes it's 9 o'clock at night. I'm old, I'm tired, I don't want to play video games, but I do it for her because we have that time we talk. As we're playing whatever game she decides we play, we have that time to talk, and she will ask me questions that she's not asking her parents. Okay? Which, if you're not talking with your kids, they're going to find somebody to talk to, whether it be their next door neighbor or somebody online. And I think that's where that communication, keeping that line open is key. And that's why I do it with my niece, because she's in a population that's very vulnerable right now with depression and other anxieties that could kick in, and compounded with she is an African American young adult. She's in a very risky, I guess, population right now because of that hopelessness that they're feeling. These kids, am I going to go to college? What is college going to look like when I go in the fall? I've never been to college. They're questioning a lot right now. So I think keeping that line of communication open is key.
Definitely. Very good.
Yeah, and creating environments. I think I like what you said about creating an environment in which it's natural to have conversations. Like, you are having these game nights, it's not something you would choose to do if you were given your choice, but you're giving an opportunity for conversation to happen naturally, as opposed to intruding upon their time or their space and saying, tell me how you're feeling. What's going on? And they're just like, hey, I was in the middle of a show. Can you leave me alone? And that's not going to be where they're going to connect. But to say, hey, I have to go to the store and I would love to have some company. Would you like to come with me? That might be an opportunity to check in as you're driving to the store. Creating those opportunities to naturally have conversations is a really great idea.
Reina, did you have anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah. I mean, thinking about young adults and older adults, I think a lot of what's been shared is still relevant, right? I was going to say, I think being active and movement is really important right now. Whether it's going for a walk or, like others said, watching, videos and following along. I think for me as a yoga teacher, I think it can be so much more helpful and liberating to think about getting movement in versus adding the expectation of exercise. So if that's helpful for people to think about, going for a 5-minute walk a couple of times a day can be great, right? Start where you are. You don't have to set unrealistic expectations. But I do know quite a few people who have yoga practices and, exercise habits that is kind of what they're holding on to right now. And I think having something to kind of hold on to, whether it's a habit or a hobby, or other people, is really important. Staying connected in some way is critical because, like little kids, we need connection to regulate and function as well. And that's one of the things that makes COVID so challenging, right? Is being distant. But as it's nicer now and we can be outside, if there's people you can be connected to in a safe and healthy way, then I think that's great. I think that also speaks to why the protests are so powerful, is because we've all been isolated and here's this issue, this crisis, and we need connection, and Black people don't want to experience that in isolation. And then something else that I think is really important is resting and managing our expectations of ourselves and especially like our cognitive capacity. Working from home is hard enough for a lot of people. Some people I know are thriving at home, but it's hard to work from home. It's hard to work when there's a pandemic going on, and what I hope is a revolution, right? It's hard to just sit down and do business as normal. And from a neurobiological perspective, like our brain and our body is focused on protecting ourselves, not getting in that report or whatever. So really managing expectations of self. And I think it's also important to think about, okay, we have our self-care practices, but also like what, is available to me in the community as a resource, or what can I plug into and provide as a resource. Having that connection is really important and is a huge protective factor against a lot of, risk factors and sort of decompensating mental health. And then I was also just thinking too, I don't know who else listening to this panel, but there are people who are living at home right now who are unsafe, right? Who are really struggling. There are people who don't have homes. So I think those are situations when community care is really important, and finding ways to reduce the harm to yourself or to others. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but again, just kind of wanted to acknowledge that there are people who, have additional challenges right now in feeling safe and healthy.
Yes, something to consider. We will be having resources posted after this conversation, and you all contributed to that. I do want to mention too, I got to plug our summer game, the library summer game, because it's an opportunity for people to get out, and it's all of it's a huge community-wide scavenger hunt. So I encourage folks to participate in that. You can go to play.aadl.org and sign up. And then if you haven't played before, there's ways for you to get points out in the community. And we've incorporated every park in Ann Arbor to have a code in it. So that's like almost 200 parks, I think. And so codes will be, you can access them, and then those codes are worth points, and then points are worth stuff that you can purchase at our summer game, all online. I mean, our summer game shop. But yeah, just you were talking about getting out, and I think for all ages, teens, adults, it's something that you can do, and get exercise and get some swag out of the deal. So there's a lot that we've discussed, and we are planning to have another panel discussion around race and racialized trauma, and the kind of work that people are doing in our community to help us process that. And so just to be aware of that, we'll have another program in the near future. Is there anything else anyone would like to add as we wind this up?
I just want to kind of wrap up by saying that as social beings, we're dependent on each other, and that's definitely true for our youngest children. And our goal shouldn't necessarily be to do all of this right, but just to take care of each other through it and to love our children, and remember that we don't have to have all the answers, that we can be present for each other and take care of each other without knowing, the outcome of everything. So showing up and coming from a place of love is going to be really crucial to help our children see through to the end of this.
I had one mom that she phrased something very well to me for the perinatal period and the young parenting, is that she's not working from home she is taking care of her family during a pandemic and trying to get some work done. And reframing so that you're being kind to yourself and realizing that your productivity is going to be different. That this situation is none that we've ever seen, and we're basically paving the road as we're walking on it. So being kind to ourselves and allowing for that opportunity. I also want to remind everyone that children are resilient. The fears that we have about what they're not getting right now academically and from school are real, but also knowing that there's time to recover once we have more opportunities to do so. And once the learning, I mean, they're doing a lot of changes in learning. So children are resilient, and the anxieties about, their future and what they're losing now can really interfere with just being present with them and taking care of each other. So try to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, for me, I just want to normalize whatever people are feeling. I think our emotions aren't necessarily something we can control, right? There are things that we can become more conscious of and develop the capacity to be able to make, more conscious decisions around what we want to do with our emotions. But our emotions are here to give us data about our experience. And so whatever is coming up for you is data, right? And it's normal. And I think these are situations that are not things that are going to be conquered overnight. And so it's okay to just do whatever it is that helps you keep going.
Yeah, I think I think Lisa, Christine, Reina, they've all said, pretty much spot on. And I would add in just understanding that self-care is something that we all need to do, from the youngest of us to the oldest of us. It's something that we have to practice every day. And with the pandemic, with all of the issues, with the racialized violence that we're experiencing right now, self-care is going to be that much more key. And it's kind of like, especially when we're working with our children, it's kind of like if you're in an airplane and they tell you put your mask on first before you help the child. Well, you have to do self-care as an adult and then help your child with self-care. Build it in now. Because we don't have all the answers of what the outcome for this pandemic or anything else that we're facing right now. As Reina said, it's data. Our emotional health, our physical health, we all need self-care to be able to continue to do the things that we want to do.
Well, you all have provided a lot of insight for us, and I really appreciate your expertise. And Marna, especially, you came in late in the game, but really, really helpful. Community, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Great meeting you guys. Christine,
Thank
Lisa,
you. Nice to
Reina,
meet all
good
of
seeing
you.
you.
Yeah.
All right. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you, like I said, in real life.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for doing this.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.